I'd like to call this meeting of the West South Milwaukee School Board to order. Mr. Sickett, would you please lead us in the pledge?
I certainly will.
With allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Suzette, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Mr. Sickett.
Present.
Ms. Steele. Here. Mr. Burns.
Present.
Mr. Becker.
Here.
Mrs. Kaiser. Here. Mrs. Carr. Here. Mrs. Lee. Here. Mr. Keller.
Here.
President Lee.
Here. Proper notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the open meeting laws of the state of Wisconsin. Do we have any modifications to the agenda this evening?
No, we have no changes for this evening.
All right, so we'll move right into the superintendent's report.
Great, thank you and good evening, everyone. We'll start with 6.1, the legislative update. There's one large piece that we're paying attention to here. So it's a new bill that would mandate crime reporting and school resources officers added. And so there's a March 2nd, there was a hearing on March 2nd. And so the legislative reference Bureau analysis of the bill, so this is quoting from them, this bill requires each public school, including a charter school, to report any incident that occurs in a school building or on school grounds to local law enforcement. The bill provides that if 100 or more incidents occur in and on public school buildings and grounds during a school semester, and all these 25 of those incidents result in an arrest, the school must, no later than the first day of the next school year, employ or contract for the employment of law enforcement officer as an armed school resource officer to work at the school. Under the bill, incident is a defined term which includes violations of state and municipal disorderly conduct laws and certain crimes, including homicide, sexual assault, burglary, battery, and arson. However, the bill provides that for purposes of counting the number of incidents that resulted in arrest, incident does not include incidents related to the use or possession of alcohol, cigarettes, nicotine, tobacco products, or vaping devices. So this is one that we'll watch because I think as the board and the public knows, we have armed school resource officers in our secondary schools. And so I'm not sure if my read at this point, we wouldn't be reimbursed for having already done that. So I think there'll be some action because there's lots of schools in the state that already have resource officers. We're a little curious just about how the money might flow under this bill if it becomes law. And then 6.2 is the Board of Education recognition. So first from Pershing, a shout out to Steve Hust. Pershing's lead custodian. Steve is such a hard worker and always goes with the flow. So thank you for all you do, Steve. At Walker would like to recognize Susanna Wells-Dixon, special education teacher, for organizing and leading a school-wide focus on the current Iditarod race in Alaska. She is running an Iditarod book club, daily trivia on the announcements, posting updates and other fun activities centered around the race. The students and staff are enjoying this and appreciate all of Susanna's work. At Hale, we'd like to thank Tony Fox and Glenn Delleman for their quick response to the small fire in the wood shop at Hale on Tuesday evening. They cleared the building and immediately found the source so the West Allis Fire Department could put the fire out with minimal damage to the building. We're grateful for their immediate response to keep students safe and protect the school from further damage. Also from Hale, the Automotive Dealers Association of Mega Milwaukee, I think everybody knows it as ATOM, conducted their annual Technicians of Tomorrow competition last Friday, March 3rd, at the Milwaukee Auto Show in downtown Milwaukee at the Wisconsin Center. Bryler Pipel and Alex Dowdy were one of only 8 school teams from Southeast Wisconsin that qualified for the competition to showcase their skills at working on cars. We are proud to announce that Bryler and Alex, under the direction of auto teacher Mr. Jack Hart, finished 4th in the competition, where they were evaluated on a written test, hands-on skill stations, and the ability to diagnose and repair problems on a vehicle within a specific time limit. In recognition of their overall 4th place finish, they won a variety of automotive tools, Snap-on and Cornwell, along with a $750 scholarship each to a tech school or $500 in additional tools, sponsored by the Wisconsin Auto and Truck Dealers Association. So congratulations to Bryler and Alex. And there'll be a number of other items coming up in the action this evening, also related to career and tech ed. And then finally, 6.3, updates and information items. So first, response to public comments. So during our regular meeting on February 27th, So our last regular meeting, public comments included 2 comments on the detachment petition from New Berlin residents. The attachment petition, as everybody knows, was not approved by our board. And we anticipate additional steps in the process with the Department of Public Instruction. The next step, if the petitioners or we decided to appeal, would be through the Department of Public Instruction. We haven't heard anything at this point. We also heard comments about our approach to transgender students, which are similar to past comments. So there's really nothing new or additional to follow up with there. School consolidation updates. We've been updating all the way through the year here. So the first round of teacher selection of open positions, so those are positions we know in other schools that are open through students moving or through retirements or resignations. So the first round of selection will close on March 15th. And then we're working to provide notification of placement on March 24th. And our goal is to match as many teachers as possible to their first or second choices coming out of that first round. But that's not the end of it, right? Then there'll be spring break happens. And then right after spring break, there'll be phase 2 of choice openings, and they'll start on April 3rd. So we're going to monitor resignations, retirements, are there new openings that occur? And then there'll be another round of choice to teachers that are being displaced because of school consolidations. Then that deadline would be April 14th, and then notification of placement, either teachers have decided they want to change or they didn't get their first or second choice, so they're still waiting for the opportunity. So that notification of placement would be April 21st, and we're quite confident by then all of those teachers will have an assignment for next year. And then we go back to our normal hiring process starting May 1st. And then finally, just other updates. I want to take this opportunity to welcome Dr. Robinson. So our incoming superintendent is with us this evening, and he's joining us all week. So he's been visiting schools. He'll be meeting with the board, meeting with leadership team. He'll be meeting with some local officials and continue his learning and transition process as our next superintendent of schools. We're excited for the future of our school district under your leadership, and we look forward to working with you in the coming weeks and months to ensure you're ready on July 1. So welcome to Dr. Robinson. And that concludes the superintendent's report.
Thank you very much. To echo that welcome before we move on to public comments this evening. For those who are interested and might be watching via Zoom or here in person, if you'd like to address the board, you have 3 minutes to do so. You must start your comments with your name and your address. And there'll be no back and forth conversation with the board, but if there's a simple question that can be answered or clarification that can be done immediately after your comments are made, that can be done. Otherwise, any additional further comments or response to your comments will be made by the next regular Board of Education meeting, either during the superintendent's report or via direct mailing or emailing. So for those who might be on Zoom, there should be a link to the sign up in the Zoom chat. And I will start with the only person who's currently signed up, which is Mr. Steve Broadwell.
I'd like to welcome Dr. Thompson too, and I only wish you could start next week. 12965 West Ohio Court, New Berlin. Misplaced priorities highlight Noah's and Marty's legacy that resulted in this district's dismal performance, worse even than MPS. Time wasted emotionally manipulating our kids with the imposition of SEL and DEI programs have had disastrous behavioral issues are on the rise. Fights and bullying are commonplace and not dealt with properly in the name of restorative justice or because you just don't like the parent. Questions about sex. Pandemic has invaded our libraries. Parents are afraid to confront you, worried about retaliation. Teachers and families are leaving the district. Your early affirmation of a child's gender confusion opens the door to puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, bodily mutilation, or lifetime of misery and regret, rather than dealing with their underlying psychological issues. Despite the total mess that is this district, you believe it is most important not to lose sight of Marty's Marty's recommitment to equity and social justice in his absurd April 2020 letter to the public that coincides with the district's steep decline. To that end, rather than address the district's many deficiencies, you feel the need to further dilute core academics with the new Black Studies course that focuses on slavery, segregation, housing disparities, incarceration, and education. Isn't this already taught in history class? Yeah, let's prioritize preparing our kids for their BLM, Antifa, or LGBTQ social activism. Sources used to develop this course feature only leftist ideologues like Harvard and Berkeley College professors who support tearing down historical monuments and are poster children for the anti-American sentiment on today's college campuses that teaches our young to hate this country. A biased NPR video falsely claims the Electoral College was established to oppress Blacks. Another biased resource, Learning for Justice, that is a project of the Marxist Southern Poverty Law Center, states as its goal to act as a catalyst in the dismantling of white supremacy. No conservative contributors, where's your diversity? No white, Asian, Hispanic, or Native American courses, where's your equity? Where's your inclusion? Our public schools have abandoned meritocracy and its foundations of virtue and reason in favor of identity politics and a pedagogy driven by this country's Marxist cultural revolution. Race and gender now trump merit in an effort to divide us. You're indoctrinating our kids through the warped lens of the left's grievance industry. Parents today need to ferociously guide their kids' hearts, minds, and souls. They are no longer safe in our public schools.
There's no one else signed up currently for public comments. So I'll wait a few seconds in case someone joined Zoom late. Seeing none, I'll close public comments at this time, and we will move on to item 8, our board reports, starting with 8.1, a review of the board calendar. Today is Monday, March 13th at 6 p.m. We have a regular Board of Education meeting. Immediately following, we have a financial stability and efficiency workshop talking about our other post-employment benefit review number 2. And immediately following, we have a closed session meeting. On Monday, March 20th at 6 p.m., we have school showcases. And immediately following, we have a closed session meeting. The school social showcases are a workshop that are open to the public. However, anyone who is listening from home, the Zoom will not be very useful during that time as we move from place to place as we listen to each school as they give their presentation. So if you are interested in coming, I would recommend you come in person. Monday, March 27th at 6 p.m., we have a regular Board of Education meeting, immediately followed by a financial stability and efficiency workshop, school consolidation workshop part 4, and a facilities and grounds overview. And then Monday, April 10th at 6 p.m., we have a regular Board of Education meeting, and immediately followed we have a financial stability and efficiency workshop, proposed 23-24 budget and preliminary tax levy number 1. Moving on to 8.2, our board committee reports this evening. We have 8.2.1, communication and community relations. Mr. Sikich.
Thank you, Mr. President. Here's our report from February 27th, the last time we met. Communications and Community Relations Board Committee meeting. We discussed board policy on advertising and commercial activities. That's our policy 9700.01. Excuse me. And how it pertains to advertising approval in our recreation guide. We discussed the language around educational objectives and will be proposing some updated language to our board at a future meeting. We also discussed our first ever annual report, which we are working on this spring. We revisited our timeline for this report in review stages and the final report coming out late in July. That concludes my report.
Very much. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Sikich regarding his report? Or any suggestions? Oh, Ms. Kaiser.
A couple financial meetings ago, we were discussing about putting a survey out to the families that open enroll out. So we can try to identify what are we missing or what can we add to encourage people to come back. Could that be something that communications and finance, we kind of work together on?
Well, and probably teacher retention too.
Yeah. Just putting that out there.
So is that a suggestion for a future agenda?
Yeah,
item for the committee?
communication survey about open enrollment out of the district and, you know, where are we?
Well, maybe we could have an ad hoc committee for that with the rep off of each board.
I'd be fine with that.
Yeah, that might
Yeah.
make more sense, because I know we wanted to do one for.
Because then you've got all voices at the meeting.
Yeah. Would that work?
I would talk with Dr. Stewart because I know she's been working
Yeah.
on it already, so.
Okay.
No, it's Dr. Stewart, so yeah.
So I know, yeah, that something was brought up, and I believe I do remember from a previous committee report that that was something that was being looked
Yeah, we
into.
brought it up in finances, but I'm thinking it'd be a good collaboration too.
I'll make a point of getting a hold of her this week and
All right.
talking about what we did here.
Thank you, Mr. Sikich.
Any other items for consideration for future communications committee meetings? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Mr. Sikich. Moving on to 8.2.2, Life Readiness through College and Career Preparation, Ms. Dio.
All right, so we met tonight, right before this meeting. So actually, we're gonna table the update on the school specialty surveys. We just didn't have all the data that we needed together. So I will provide an update on that after our next meetings next month. Then secondly, there was a suggestion that we create an academic recovery plan, similar to some other districts in the area. And we currently do have some milestones or goals in place. They're just not like in one place, like on paper in one particular document. So what we're going to be doing is Deidre and her team are going to be working on a draft. So it will be a formalized or a public facing document that would have all of our milestones, goals, and then broken down into what our objectives are, all those type of things. So she will be working on that with her team. She'll bring a draft to it at our April meeting, and we'll go over that and then hopefully be able to bring something to the board.
Okay.
And then, and the other thing about that is we also said that we're going to have the superintendent provide updates on our academic recovery plan, similar to how we were providing updates with like the superintendent search, the COVID updates, the school consolidation, that stuff like that. So that's the other thing that we will do. We've got a couple of upcoming workshops. So on April 17th, we'll be having our guaranteed and viable curriculum workshop. And then on May 15th, we'll have our student services workshop. Both of those nights are workshop only, so we don't have any meetings. So we'll be able to have enough time to actually talk with all the services and all the different teachers and instructors and stuff. And then just as an update, our math curriculum adoption workshop, we're actually going to push it back to May instead of April, just because we're getting more information, more data collection as we're trialing it in the different classrooms. And then we discussed some future agenda items. So some ones that we're going to include for our next meeting is we're going to get an update on the Human Growth and Development Committee work that they're doing. And then we want to start working on developing some transition plans for as Deidre prepares to leave the district, so we can figure out, make sure that we're all on board and what we need to do as we transition. So that's what we have.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for anything that Mr. reported on? Or any suggestions for future agenda items? Seeing none, we'll move on to 8.3, board member reports of community events. Are any events that board members attended? Ms. Kaiser?
I attended Jefferson PTA's literacy night, and it was really cute. They had kids doing scavenger hunts for words around their locations. They had loads of games. There was a lot of kids involved. It was nice to see families of all ages. Longfellow families are starting to come to more things, so that was very, very nice to see. I just want to thank Jefferson PTA has been reaching out a lot, and which has been very nice for me to just schedule and go.
Thank you very much. Ms. Carr?
I've been out and about in the schools lately, and I attended Jefferson had a pop-up store, which was really cute and really well thought out and planned. And I was a judge, an AKA a shark, at the Longfellow's 4th and 5th grade Shark Tank public presentation.
Oh, cute.
Where they shared their proposals for their mock businesses. And also I attended the kickoff of the Youth Art Month at the public library. And then I hopped over to Inspiration Studio, which I know a lot of you guys attended as well. It's an art gallery, to absolutely marvel at the work of our talented intermediate and high school. all while being serenaded by our Shining Strings music students. So it was lovely.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. Carr. Ms. Deal.
Oh, yeah. I also actually ran into Ms. Carr at Inspiration Studios. It was wonderful. And I found out that my kid had some artwork that was being displayed that he didn't even tell me about. So that was a nice surprise. It was really great. It was also wonderful talking with the studio owner, and it was just great seeing families and teachers there and this community. So if you have a chance, the artwork is up through the end of the month. So check out, either go to the West Dallas Public Library or Inspiration Studios and check out all the great artwork from our students. The other thing I was able to go to is the orchestra, All District Orchestra concert on, last week, Wednesday. It was, anytime we have a music event in our district, I'm always, because I can't play an instrument, so I'm always like just blown away. And it was absolutely phenomenal. I mean, they bring in all the schools. You have kids, from third grade and up, and they haven't even played with each other, and yet they, the band directors get up there, or the orchestra directors, and it was great. So kudos to Mary Pat Michaels and her team.
All right, thank you very much. Anyone else have any other community events that they would like to report on? So as always, I always go last, and most people have said the things that I was able to attend. Also was able to go to Inspiration Studios after Ms. Deal and Ms. Carr were there, so I was able to present after, or to represent, I should say, after other people attended. Again, the talent that some of the students in our district are is quite amazing. So I'm glad that we have an opportunity to be able to showcase that for not only people in the district, but for the community as well. It was a community event, and people were welcome to come in for the public. And there were some people there that I actually saw some people purchasing some of the art from that our students had created, which is amazing and awesome. I also was able to attend the All District Orchestra concert, which again, it's amazing what our students are able to do and the opportunities they have at such young ages, which is not common in districts in other parts of the state. So I think that is great to be able to showcase, and I think they did a wonderful job. The one different thing that I was able to attend was the 2023 Wisconsin Young Artists Honors Orchestra, which was held this last weekend. It's held always at McMonagle High School because they have a fantastic performing arts center there. And so it's made up of students from across different school districts in the state, and they are invited to attend. And it's a kind of an all day long thing where they come in the morning and they work together on some songs, and then they have a concert in the afternoon. So I was able to attend that, and our own Mary Pat Michaels is one of the ones who actually directs one of those choirs. There's 3 different ones based on the so it was a great event. And again, when you listen, these districts, and some are saying like, well, some of these students haven't even started playing until they're in 5th or 6th grade. They don't have the opportunities that we have at 1st grade, where they can start learning an instrument, determining if they want to do it. So I think that's, again, a great testament, and we had a number of students in that orchestra as well. So with that, we move on to 8.4, other updates and information items, which is my thing that I don't really have anything new here other than to, again, welcome Dr. Robinson. He's attending here all week long, going to be meeting with a number of different individuals in the community as well as at our schools. And so I welcome and thank him for taking the time to do that, to be able to learn about our district more in-depthly, so that when he is here on July 1, he can hit the ground running, and we can really continue moving the work forward. So thank you for that. Moving our consent agenda this evening, we have 9.1, approval of minutes from our regular board meeting on February 27th. 9.2, the employment summary. 9.3, supplementary contract. And 9.4, approval to issue 23-24 regular teacher eligible teachers. Does anyone need anything separated out? And 9.5, approval to issue preliminary non-renewal notices to teachers. Sorry, I had to scroll down more. Anyone need anything separated out?
Move to approve. Second.
Moved and seconded. Any last minute discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. Now move on to our action items this evening with our first one, 10.1, Technical Excellence Scholarship recipients. And I believe Mr. Carr will be talking to us about that. Joe's the vet here. He knows where all the microphones work, right, Joe?
I can't hear you well. Thanks for having me here tonight. We have three separate items that I wanted to present to you today, and they're all somewhat connected. The first is the Technical Excellence Scholarship. Since 2015, Technical Excellence Scholarship has been offered to our students here in our district. 3 scholarships each at Central and Hale. And then we also have an alternate. Really interesting this year with the scholarship award recipients this year. It actually works towards our next group of kids when I'm going to talk about the Start College Now kids, because all of the seniors that are going to get this scholarship this year are currently enrolled in a dual enrollment program. So they're already started down that path. Really, I've been very impressed with the kids who applied. You know, I say it all the time, kids don't realize $2,250 twice makes it, that matters. And we took some doing, had to go, you realize you write this application for 45 minutes, that's $2,250. That's an hour, you know, pretty good money. And then the kids are like, really? Oh yeah, I can do that. So it worked out great. And so we have some much very deserving award winners for Technical Excellence Scholarship. They're all concentrators and they're all in dual enrollment. So that makes them fairly easy to select for that. In Start College Now, we have 10 students who met the March 1st deadline to apply for Start College Now. So that going into the fall semester, these students will be on the pathway to college, their college experience while they're in high school. And you'll notice on my list of students who applied and were approved, we have 3 kids, and this is fairly new or fairly different, somewhat different from our previous experience. We have 3 kids involved in the Dual Enrollment Academy, which is a fairly comprehensive experience in dual enrollment. So those students will spend the vast majority of their time at MATC's campus in construction trades. Interesting. A female construction trades kid in dual enrollment, which is super cool. And then 2 firefighter academy participants. They'll be at the MATC campus starting in the fall, along with the other 7 who applied and were granted the opportunity to go to Start College Now at MATC or WCTC. The third thing I'd like to present to you today is we haven't had this before either. We have 3 students who applied to go to summer for the summer session for the early college credit program.
Wow.
Which is fairly ambitious. I had one student said, "Well, I'd like to take these 6 classes this summer." I'm like, I don't think you can really do that. That's pretty ambitious, but so we talked it through, and she's going to take 2 courses. And but I really think when we have students who are interested in moving forward and getting started on their professional lives and their academic experiences and post-secondary, when they can do that while they're still in high school, we've got to meet them there. And I appreciate our board supporting them in that. And thank you very much for providing them with this opportunity. The more students we have, they're just moving quickly and accelerating through their school experience. So are there any questions about those 3 agenda items?
Any questions from the board? So just to be clear, I originally just talked about 10.1, which is the Technical Excellence Scholarship recipients, but we also are looking at 10.2 and 10.3 together. And unless the board has any objections about approving those all together, we can do that. But I just want to make sure that we're clear on that for the record. Are there any questions for Mr. Carr regarding these opportunities for our students, or any of the students that have been before as recipients or having for these opportunities? No? Ms.
I just have to say, these programs are wonderful. I spoke to a community member this weekend and I said, I'm a board member. And the first thing they said was, thank you for these kids that are doing these CNA programs, these nursing programs, these tech programs. And it just warmed me because it's like, it's wonderful to hear the positive.
Yeah.
And it's nice to know that these programs are being well utilized. So that's a testament to you. So
I
thank you.
appreciate that. Thanks. Yeah, it's nice to, we're continue to grow those programs and more kids who get on board and can walk in with a industry recognized credential, walking out of high school. They're going to earn their way through whatever their next part of their life's going to be. So thank you for noticing that. Thanks. Appreciate it. Sorry to jump down from, I just got going. So thanks again. Appreciate it.
I believe in the past we have approved multiple together. Is there any, did you have something else?
I was just gonna move to approve
Yeah.
10-1, 10-2, and 10-3.
Second.
Motion once, second 4 times. All right, any last minute discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. Thank you very much, Mr. Carr.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carr.
All right, so we'll then move on to 10.4, teacher retention and staffing waive board policy 3131. That's Dr. Lutzman and Ms. Rayner is written down as well.
So go ahead. So we've mentioned this a couple of times in the past months. Part of it tied to school consolidations as we work through all of the staffing, like I described in my updates. As we work through that, we also started to really think about the dynamic of teacher shortages these days. And the policy that we're asking to have waived for the next hiring cycle really now stands in conflict to the dynamics of trying to find and keep quality qualified teachers. That policy was put in place because, we were experiencing declining enrollment. We knew we needed to have some process to identify through the budget to identify what positions we no longer needed, and then a process that would identify which teachers are in positions that were no longer needed, right? So that was the intent of that policy. That was developed with the association at the table, with principals at the table. So we put together what we thought was a reasonable and predictable process. And then that was cleaned up a little bit in 2021. Just a little bit of it was still some subjectivity that this board supported taking that out of the process. And so it has served us until we hit the dynamic of, we can't find and keep enough people. So we're hoping that by waiving this, and it's really kind of trying it on for this cycle so that we will still use the matrix that is here to identify which teachers are going to need to go to a different school because the school doesn't need all of their positions. So, and that's appropriate in terms of managing the finances well. We shouldn't overstaff schools because that's a cost we don't need to have included. But at the same time, we don't want to lose that person because we know there'll be openings through normal attrition, through the movement of school consolidation. So that's why it's in front of you this evening to waive that policy, but with the understanding we'll still use the matrix. We're just not providing non-renewal notices to any teachers that get displaced through the matrix, right? So in the past, they would then have, under what you approved in the consent agenda this evening, would have then received a non-renewal notice for fiscal reasons, not performance. And so that's the step we're not doing if you waive the policy.
So it would be just for this year and then we would have to waive it back in.
You would have to waive it back in
You know, when we're done.
if a year from now, there's similar circumstances, then the administration would need to come back and ask to have it waived again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So after a year, it automatically would go back to.
So it'll automatically go back into 1 year.
And then just to clarify, the plan would be to use ESSER funding to do this? Or what's the plan for?
So it's a good question, because I have talked about that as well, and these do overlap. So if as a result of school consolidations of people moving and this, where we're not providing non-renewal notices, we end up with more teachers than we need from a budget planning perspective, that's where we'll use ESSER money to keep people. And then through another kind of normal cycle of attrition, that'll balance itself back out. We don't want to start to carry permanent positions in the budget that we don't think we need. That's part of managing the finances effectively. But at the same time, while we have the dollars and there's quite a bit of disruption in the system to provide some security to teachers that anybody that's here, that wants to be here next year, we can cover it.
Other questions? So I guess the only thing that I would say is, in your opinion, because I know you don't have to worry about this after a few more months, but in your opinion, is this a policy that we should think about revisiting as far as how the landscape has changed for teachers? As in how that we, instead of having a policy that we have to waive every year, maybe modify the policy that allows more flexibility for administration to be able to make that decision based off of what we're seeing and what we have in front of us as far as number of positions versus number of staff.
Yeah, great question. So I would advise that if similar circumstances are playing out, 9-10 months from now, then the answer is yes. And the policy probably in total should be reconsidered.
And I think given our decline in enrollment has kind of started to level out, the need for these large number of decreases will continue to subside. So that would further aid the suggestion of maybe reconsidering, the language change for future years.
The thing I like about the policy, it provides clarity to staff of how those decisions are made when necessary. But the need to do it, especially in situations where maybe some buildings need to have a lower ratio for one reason or another, and that flexibility isn't allowed at this point with the policy. And so something that I think could be considered in the future. So thank you for that. Any additional questions on this? Should I look for a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any last minute discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. Thank you very much. We'll move on to 10.5, our debt defeasance. We have Mr. Norris and guest.
Well, I guess I'll start by thanking you guys for having me this evening. And with me is Mr. Mike Clark. He's the Director of Public Finance at Baird Financial. Got that right? I got that right. Perfect. So Jill's going to pass out kind of a debt defeasance schedule that Mr. Clark and his team at Baird put together for us to kind of give you a short outline. It's a little confusing, a short outline of kind of, what from a fiscal perspective, what this proposal would do for our district in terms of just cost savings overall, like what are the cost savings by defeasing our current debt, right? There are other benefits, but just focus on, it's like, if you're going to refinance debt, what are you gaining, right? This is not refinancing, it's kind of removing our obligation to debt. And Mr. Clark and I will talk a little bit more about that. And so given that we hadn't had a workshop, I put together a few slides to give you some background on what this might mean and kind of how it works. So we're going to jump through that and then we will open up to questions and go from there. So kind of the agenda for debt defeasance is really what does it mean? What does defeasing debt mean? Number one, and then how does it actually work? And then we'll take a look at our current debt outlook and the schedule, kind of referencing a bit the piece of paper that Jill passed out. Kind of what are some short and long-term fiscal strategies by doing that? How that fits in with the board approved ESSER plan that we had adopted a year and a half ago. And then really getting into the resolution for consideration for the board to approve, and then open up to questions that you might have. So debt defeasance is defined as it's a provision in a contract that voids a bond or loan on a balance sheet when the borrower wants to set aside funds to sufficiently repay their obligation for non-callable debt. Non-callable debt really just means debt is only paid at the time of maturity. It means you can't prepay without losing the assessed interest that was already guaranteed to the institution that gave out the loan. So callable debt would mean you could pay it off early and you would not pay the interest. Like most people's mortgages are callable, meaning you could pay it early, and by paying it early, you don't pay the interest, right? There's an incentive to the homeowner to do that, right? Non-callable debt is kind of the opposite. So that is that. So how does it work? So steps to defeasing, I guess, Fund 38 debt. I make a note here. This is not energy efficiency debt. This is our debt that remains beyond that. Okay. So first we analyze what our current Fund 38 liabilities are, and they remain. So currently we have a total of just under $4.5 million of 38 non-energy efficiency debt. We then compare and contrast those current debt liabilities to existing cash, and the analysis of cash, like do we have the funds aside to prepay that? What are the benefits of doing that? If we prepay that debt, does it put us in a financial issue that we may not want to be in? Things like that. So this essentially tells you if it's possible to defease the debt, right? Then we work with Baird, Mr. Clark here, to if it's possible to work with opening an account through an escrow agent who can take on the liabilities, because again, we can't prepay them. We can set aside funds where someone can take ownership of the debts and then make those payments at subsequent maturity dates. Since the debt's not callable, the escrow, I just mentioned this, can't simply pay it off. This means that once the debt becomes callable, they would make the payments at that time. And since the money, since the escrow agent essentially holds our funds to make the payment, the escrow agent then is able to take those dollars and they can invest them however they may want, and they can accrue interest from those dollars, right? So by doing that, they provide an incentive to do that, which shows you in blue the amount that we would be required to pay them to, I guess, meet our liability with our current outstanding debt, which is where you see the net savings by doing that of just under $300,000 by opening this escrow account. If that makes sense. This is kind of an overview of what current, I guess, overall Fund 38 debt. Energy efficiency is considered Fund 38 debt, although the funding structure for that operates similar to what is considered similar to referendum debt, in that fact that we every year of energy efficiency debt, we get additional dollars from the community and the levy for that. So it is Fund 38 debt, but it operates a little differently. So the other three, I guess, debt notes that we have, you can see on the left which ones would be defeased. And this is as of today. We have our next debt payment scheduled here for 2 weeks. So these amounts will be reduced once that debt payment, which was already planned in this year's budget to be made, is made. And so the only non-energy efficiency Fund 38 debt that is not being paid off through this is the $1 million general obligation, of which we only have 221,000, which really is 111,000, because that this year's April debt payment has not been assessed. If that makes sense. So the bulk of our debt will be, I guess, considered paid off through this process. Here, just a little overview of that. This is kind of an interesting way to look at it, of our debt. So you can see kind of, if you look at 2023 here, you can see kind of the total amount of debt that we have. That's payments by fiscal year, not total, right? Just payments by fiscal year. So in blue, the bulk of our debt, as you would have seen here, is our energy efficiency. And then kind of in red is the 2015 bond, and then the remaining are just lesser amounts, okay? And the reason I show you that is you can kind of see here by making our debt, I guess by opening a defeasance, you can see the line substantially reduces what's left of our Fund 38 debt that's remained. So essentially all will be left beginning in April of 24, really after that small amount is paid off next fiscal year, is really our energy efficiency, of which we receive every dollar for that debt. So it's not really budgetary dollars being used to pay that debt. That makes sense. So what are the benefits, right? So beyond this initial savings of around 284,000, there are some additional benefits that we can receive as a district by doing something like this. So short term, we kind of hit on this at the preliminary budget, is the unknown biennial budget cycle. We don't know what's going to happen, right? So by defeasing debt, you're essentially freeing up revenue next year by not having a debt payment for the fiscal year. So, if the state budget turns out not to be, I guess, more advantageous for school districts, having those dollars available are going to be, in the premium, right, for us. And so at a time of uncertainty, having more certainty is a good thing, right? So that's short term. That could also be considered long term, but certainly short term for us is a big deal. I mentioned this number two, short term, saving $284,000 over the life of those loans are definitely a benefit to the district and to us financially. And then really number three, and this is the big piece, and I'll get to this in a minute, we have a fund balance we carry in Fund 38 that the board in previous budget cycles, I believe it was 1920, set aside a surplus. And the reason that we did that at that time was because we knew with declining enrollment, there are going to be non-recurring one-time exemptions that we're going to have to be able to budget through in a time of, I don't want to use a crisis, but like at that year when those exemptions fall off, how are you going to make the budget balanced? Well, the thinking at the time was set aside dollars in Fund 38, and that at the time when exemptions fall off, you can use those dollars to not make debt payments, which is essentially what this proposal is tonight, right? So, and I'll show you kind of how the dollars break down in a minute, but that's kind of a short-term benefit. So long-term, kind of a little more philosophical, but making the $4 million roughly debt payment in terms of the defeasance is considered shared cost eligible, right? So we're increasing in the fiscal year 23 our shared costs. Well, how does that help us? Well, our shared costs impact our aid in the future years. So the following year, our shared costs or our aid is based upon how much shared costs we have. So by increasing the amount of expense we have in 1 year, that's fiscally appropriate, you can actually receive more in state aid, which will reduce the levy, which helps us in a multitude of ways, helps the community, also helps us with our Fund 80 recreation projects. There's a multitude of things that would help. So that's certainly a huge benefit for us. Number two, short and long term mentioned is, approximately reduces our projected liabilities in future years by about $1.5 million next year. And then, a little bit less each year thereafter. But certainly with a projected, at this point, based on the conservative assumptions we have with the budget, reduces our structural deficit next year from 3 million to $1.5 million. So certainly at this point, definitely a short and long-term benefit. And then I mentioned this on both. So the dollars were set aside in future years for this purpose. So let's look at what exactly this would cost, right? Let's showing kind of the breakdown here. So I kind of linked in the board approved ESSER plan there, which really one of the main structural benchmarks was to reduce our structural deficit. And if you can look at the table, given the amount of ESSER money we do have, which was presented at the last prelim budget, we're not talking about a substantial amount in terms of comparatively to the ESSER amount of money we received, right? So we currently saved from prior budgets have just under $3,225,000 set aside for this kind of strategy, right? We need $4 million and just over $4 million. So we roughly need about $800,000 of ESSER funds to make up the gap, which would then free us of really Fund 38 debt. So really the recommendation is for the board to consider the resolution to approve the debt defeasance strategy without me reading that. And with that, I would take questions from the board for either Mr. Clark or myself.
Ms. Kaiser.
So savings we see, is that gonna be over time or is it like a yearly savings, like the 284K? Or is it like
Yeah, and maybe you could jump into on that, but yeah.
I mean, you can really allocate the savings to any year. You could spread it over a number of years. It's just part of the reduction in future debt payments that you'd have that you're eliminating. The savings comes in immediately because you're making a payment today of just over 4 million towards an obligation that's roughly 4.3 today. So you're generating the savings this fiscal year if you take action. It's a cash flow state savings over the next 4 years. So you could spread it out over 4 years if you want, but
Depends how you look at it. though.
it's the total, your total payments over that period of time are reduced by the $284,000.
But you're just like getting that amount up front though.
So this kind of eliminates Fund 38 because we're using it to pay this.
Minus energy efficiency.
Right.
Correct.
Right,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's also a positive from a credit rating standpoint. I know the district, we've come a long way the last few years as far as your credit rating and, eliminating debt, even though your debt load is very low, given your size. It's a positive from that standpoint as well, I wanted to mention.
Other questions? So just to be clear, the forethought of this district board and administration in years past has allowed money to be set aside that will allow us as a district, a board community to save $284,000 plus in debt that we would have had to pay anyways by putting this into an escrow fund. We paid off over the time period as necessary. That will in turn around and provide more money that we can use directly back into classrooms, because now we're not paying $1.5 million and then whatever it is over the next 4 years, immediately, essentially in the next, over the next course of the next fiscal year, because we're essentially paying off that Fund 38 debt that is not related to energy efficiency.
That is correct.
All right, just want to make sure.
No, it's a good question. Yeah. It's a good summary of what this was. Yeah. Yeah.
So in total, you know, we're saving,
Over your
Where-
dictionary.
we're saving, we're not necessarily saving taxpayers money because it's money that we're paying either way. However, we're reducing by 284,000. So that money is money that we're not having to pay. So it's like a discount on that debt.
And you may in future years, given the shared cost increase, actually save the community money in the subsequent year by receiving increased aid.
Well, that's true, right?
So
From the
for 1 year, you know, you get the aid spike, so you know that would help
So-
the community.
So does that mean for 1 year it might go down, then maybe it might go up, back up a little bit, the mill rate?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible, but you know, given the state budget, and things like that, it's uncertain at this time. Fund 80, you know, things like
Right.
that.
So we know that's a possibility, and not because we did something wrong, but
Correct.
because we did something right.
Yes, something right. Yes. Yeah.
Important to note, unfortunately. Any other questions or comments? So I'll look for the motion, yeah. So that was the presentation, and then there's specific language, which I will read and then look for a motion and second on that language. So before I do that, because that's something we're going to take action on, doing this defeasance, I want to make sure everyone understands, if has any questions they want to do before I read that and move into action. It's good. So then I would look for a motion and second, a resolution authorizing the transfer of funds, the establishment of escrow accounts with respect to the defeasance of the taxable general obligation to funding bond, refunding bonds, series 2015A, dated February 26, 2015, and the defeasance of the general obligation promissory notes, series 2015C, dated September 16th, 2015.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any last minute discussion? And then we will have to do a roll call vote for this. Suzanne?
Mrs. Kaiser.
Yes.
Mr. Burns.
Yes.
Mrs. Lee.
Yes.
Mrs. Carr.
Yes.
Mr. Sickich.
Yes.
Mr. Becker.
Yes.
Mr. Keller.
Yes.
Ms. Deal. Yes. President Lee.
Yes. That passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for the work on this. It's a great thing for the district moving forward. So now that ends the business portion of our meeting this evening. We'll move right into our workshop, financial stability and efficiency. Our other post-employment benefits review number 2, Mr. Norris, once again.
Perfect. Let me grab the packets quick and
Only 66 like those. Yeah.
Pay you per slide.
I'll say that, we'll put a timer on it.
Suzanne, you set the clock. If you see it starting to nod out.
Yeah, he said 30 minutes, so.
no one's got to use his time. So.
Oh, another West Milwaukee school. My collection.
Very efficient.
I don't need to find my kids, it's a whole, not even my shoulder, I was like, here you go. Can't be red, no.
At least Joe got one.
I thought it was just playing it safe by starting down there.
Ready to go?
Yeah.
I just want to first start out and say that Ken Zastra, who was here at the first presentation, is out with I think his whole family's sick tonight.
Oh,
Stomach
no.
flu and maybe COVID. I'm not sure yet. He's waiting on the test. So
It was at the entire tournament,
yeah,
my
Yeah.
son's entire team.
yeah. I know,
Sick one.
yeah, he said he'd spoken with you, and I know his son's test came back negative for that, so no need for concern
Yeah,
at this
there was
point.
no
but,
COVID for us either,
yeah.
but it's like a stomach bug.
Yeah, so, but he sends his regards and apologizes for not being here tonight, and he's been really instrumental in the process, as you guys know, and he's been with us, working through this, from our first workshop and before that to meeting with the executive association leadership and focus groups and the all staff presentations we've had. So just wanted to make a note that he made every intent to be here, but could not. Also want to take time to thank you guys for your patience and your support. This has been a long process that almost spanned a full year here. So we're coming full circle, but also want to thank my team who Jessica's not here, but Jill Rakowski, our retiree benefit specialist, is here this evening. She's been helping me read retirement language here for the better part of 3 months. So, our eyes are getting a little glossed over, but we're here. And so ready to go. And then, Mike Lukomsky, just district accountant, and then Jessica Johnson, our benefit specialist for active employees. And also want to thank our teachers and staff who have, worked after work to be a part of the process and come to focus groups and take time on the PD day to engage and ask good questions. And it's just, I feel like we've been very, very thorough in giving people opportunity to meet and engage and take time to ask questions. And I feel like that's really important because this is a big deal. This is a big decision. And so with that, let's jump in. So the presentations has some similarities to our first workshop. And I know it's been a number of months since you've heard this last. So I do have some things that might be a little redundant and things you've heard before, but overall, a lot of new things to talk about this evening. So we're first going to talk about the timeline of events, which got us here this evening. Number two, kind of dive into a little bit of the proposal again and get your brains back in that. Not that they've left, but it's been a long time. Talk about the survey results that we got from staff, both pre and post, to give you guys a sense of like, where are people on benefits before they heard this and where are they after it, right? And this tells, I think, us a lot of good feedback about what we can do in the future, because like our benefits are very robust and I think very, very competitive to the regional average. But if people don't know them, that does not make that's a problem, right? So we've learned a lot through the process too, which has sediments around why you go through processes like this, right? Talk about a little bit about the revised retirement language, and then we'll talk about the Fund 73 trust and the cash flow analysis, next steps and questions. And so before we get in, I'm just going to kind of highlight this packet in front of you. So on the left side of your packet is the the sample investment schedules that you received last time. So just kind of another piece there. And then on the right side is our draft at this point, updated retirement language that I think does a better job of visually showing you kind of, what the plan was, what it is now, what are the groups, kind of who gets what. And then the second page is kind of the defined language that kind of provides clarity and examples and explains and things like that. So we've been working with John Shore's, you guys all know John Shore, his firm has someone that specializes in retirement language. So we've been working with Kelly on that and getting this updated and ready to go. So this is kind of some light reading. I won't go in depth on these this evening because they are redundant a bit, but to kind of give you an example, all of that will be in the presentation this evening. Okay, so timeline review. This is kind of speaks to the year that we've gone through. So not quite a year, but May. So we began in May of last year with the actuarial study, which took some time. We'll have to engage again around that should the board take action to approve to have essentially our OPEB liability reevaluated. But that began in May, and then really beginning in May through pretty much the entire summer, there was research development of the OPEB proposals, regional comparables, and essentially waiting for the Milliman study to come back to get us a sense of what is the cash flow analysis around that. So that came back in November. We met with the board, everyone here on the 19th, just prior to Christmas for the first workshop. We had our meeting after the holidays with the executive association to go through the proposal and get feedback there. From there, we had an optional employee focus group 1 in January, a principal cabinet presentation end of January, a second focus group in the beginning of February. And then really we had a full day development with all staff, all employee groups on the 13th, which is during the workday. And then that leads us here this evening. Okay. And then pending board feedback, this evening, we would look potentially to move to take this to action at the end of the month. And then there's some other subsequent things that would happen. You can kind of look through this here and see, to open a Fund 73 trust, there's a DPI approval process that takes place where the minutes from the future meeting, similar to our Fund 46, have to be read in. A legal opinion has to be drafted that this was, I guess, the procedures were followed and from an unbiased source. And then from there, we would look at creating the actual HRA accounts, opening the trust, depositing the funds. And then my goal would be by the end of the school year, all staff who are eligible will receive a statement. So that way they could see that as they exit for the school year. So that's kind of the timeline leading for today. I didn't mention, but I would prefer questions being held to the end unless there's a pressing one, just so we can get through this timely. Okay, so what is OPEB? We've talked about this. So the definition of OPEB there is an acronym which refers to other post-employment benefits. These are benefits other than the pension distributions that employees may begin to receive from their employer once they retire. So OPEB is local and it is separate from the Wisconsin retirement system. So other companies, other areas of employment across the country, they look very similar. So private companies have HRAs, 401k stock options, and school districts. I really broke that down before pre-Act 10 and post-Act 10 because benefits existed, but they look different pre-Act 10 and post-Act 10 given the funding restrictions that occurred at that time. So pretty much pre-Act 10, everyone had the same thing in terms of compensation, salary schedules, health insurance at retirement, sick leave, years of service, and those things have changed since then given that funding reduction. And in some school districts, post-Act 10 don't have any benefit here, right? And some do, and some have rich plans, and some have not rich plans. So it's a variety, but the theme is districts that do use things like HRA, they have early retirement options, and then some have sick leave. So the theme here is that you've likely heard of these benefits, but maybe never heard them called OPEB. So kind of a branch off Marty's earlier approval of the reduction in force process being waived is that, quality benefits today are probably the most important thing we can talk about in the terms of retention of staff. And so with a national average of teachers leaving the profession or accepting other positions in the 20s, mid to high 20s, whatever that looked like this year, it's coming up. Having good benefits for our employees are good for us and them, right? We need people to stay that want to work in our district, and we need to be regionally comparable or better to keep them in these days. So, that's, to be honest, that's the best reason to have something that's good that attracts staff. And the thing I'll get to later is the best benefits are the ones people use, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So just to be really crystal clear, OPEB is local retirement benefits, and it includes the things I mentioned. And the Wisconsin retirement system is a trust outlined by the state of Wisconsin that is, it's accessible to all public entities with the subtraction of Milwaukee County, but it has its own separate eligibility investing and has nothing to do with this presentation, just to be very clear for anyone in the room or watching online. So kind of getting into what the issue is with our current plan. So an unfunded benefit is really just that, unfunded. It's funded at the time of retirement, and it's a benefit paid out to an employee at the time of retirement. So unfunded means that we don't budget for that employee at all until they retire, and then the whole obligation comes due. Well, that is bad for fiscal practice, and it is the opposite of how every financial advisor would advise anyone in this room to practice for their own fiscal health, right? They advise you save as you go, and you make plans around what your needs are, and then you save according to those plans. Well, that's the issue with unfunded benefits, are that they're unfunded. So that's kind of the underlying issue. And so given that it's unfunded, districts at the time of reduction of revenue in Act 10 moved away from unfunded benefit practices to defined contributions or the removal of all benefits, right? Those were the options. But you can see an unfunded benefit is something like insurance, because if I said to you, someone at 25 is guaranteed insurance at retirement, and I said, what would that cost you in 30 years? You would not know. I do not know. I could guess, I'd likely be wrong, but that's an unfunded benefit. It's increasing in amount. You can't plan for it. It's impossible to make a wholesome budget to do that. So Sick leave is similar, not as egregious as insurance, but similar in terms of that. So that's kind of an example of that. So why is it problematic? I hit on this a bit. Unfunded benefit practice really across the board ended in post Act 10 era here. There are some that exist. We have one. Ours was redeveloped in 2011 to reduce the amount of unfunded practice, but remains unfunded, right? And so the thing here that I want to mention, so in 2021, which that's the last data we have at this point from Baird, is our district ranked in the 92nd percentile for OPEB benefits, meaning that we're near the top in terms of the richest in the state. And that comparatively to salaries, we ranked in the 28th percentile, which shows you kind of the extremes we're at in terms of offering people good benefits at retirement, but then not offering maybe regionally comparable salaries to people during active employment. So that's kind of, I think, an important point to make and to talk about. But overall, what does that mean for our budget? Well, we budget about $3.5 million of each year's budget for people who don't work here, which is an obligation that we've taken on. And so trying to figure out a way to reduce that while offering competitive benefits to then maybe repurpose those dollars to solve a different issue is kind of some of the thinking right here. So that's a little bit about kind of why it's an issue, right? So this slide we presented on this in December, but this is a great visual to highlight that exact issue, right? And so as you can see here, I've broken up into a bar graph our staff by years of service and bands. So we have staff who, local years of service, you can see 0 to 5, just under or just over 40% of our staff today are in year 1 or up to year 5. And then you can see that declines to 6 to 10 to about a quarter, 11 to 15, that gets cut in half again, and then 15 to 27%. And then it jumps up for the staff who have 20 plus years, just under 15%. So some fun data. What does this mean? So the average age of a teacher in our district today is 34. And when this group of staff who are in years 20 or more are retired, that age goes to 28. And so for those of you in the room who are teachers, who have been teachers, who know teachers, graduating at 22, 23 and being considered a veteran staff within your first 5 years is not something it's unthinkable a bit to people who have been in the profession for a long time. So that, as I mentioned before, at our first workshop, our current retirement benefits fiscally at this time are not an issue, right? But this is a problem, right? So if this problem were to somehow be fixed, they would become a detrimental issue, because the reason they're not is because people don't stay to retirement here. So our liability at retirement is less because very few people make it, right? So that, to me, and I'm sure to you here, that's not a goal of the organization to not have people make it to retirement. The goal is to get people here early and have this district remain a destination and a place that you worked your whole career, if that's possible. So just to me, this is a really powerful slide to talk about and to highlight, because I think it highlights maybe the issue, right, as opposed to some of the proposal we'll talk about. So kind of another way to show cost over time. So you can see, as I mentioned before, is the proposal hasn't changed from 2017, which is the beginning of this graph, to 2026, assuming that nothing changed. How is it possible that our liabilities would be decreasing if everything that's unfunded is increasing? Well, it's because people aren't making it to the end. So our actuarials look at our retention rates and look at the number of employees who've started and ended here, and they go back 10 years to develop what they believe is a reasonable number, that they believe what it will cost us with the increases of health insurance. And they've shown that, hey, in years 23 and forward, it's going to decrease. The bubble in here is the early retirement window. So we had more people retire earlier, which makes sense. And our liability gets taken off the books early, right? And then that also is due to some of the drop. But, overall, these two graphs kind of speak to each other a bit, right? And so just kind of to connect that a bit. Loss ratio. So I hit on this before at the first workshop too. So health insurance companies use what's called a loss ratio to determine what your premium renewals are in future years. So a loss ratio is essentially like how many people use the services that are provided by the insurance company, right? So if you have a one school district and everyone goes to the doctor all the time, your loss ratio is probably through the roof. And if people don't go at all, it's probably not very high. So some of the thinking here was my hypotheses when I got into this was that given that we've had an unfunded benefit practice dating back to who knows when, right? Where staff who retire are able to access insurance. It is the hypothesis question, is our premium renewal higher because we have retirees who access the insurance more frequently than active employees who are younger? Has that driven up the cost for our active employees? Getting back to the total compensation question, right? So initially in 19, you can see here, I was wrong. In 19, our active employees, or the loss ratio was higher than our retirees. So to give you some sense about the numbers here, an 80% loss ratio would represent a 80, 85. It depends on the company. And, we're a larger client. So 85%, we might receive a 0 increase, right? Things like that. But 80% is usually the kind of the number that districts shoot for, 80, 85, because that represents a 0% increase, right? So if you assume 85 is 0, 95 is 10%, right? So, anything over 90 is, you really want to try to get it below that, right? Just kind of a goal. It doesn't always happen, but it's a goal. So in 2020, our active employee loss ratio was 80%. Our retirees was 113. In 2021, it got closer again, 98, just under 98.5 to 100. And then in this year through March, it was 71% to 157. So, over time, I think it's evident that our retirees loss ratio is higher than active employees. To what degree? The last one is probably some degree of outlier, high cost claims. That's an egregious difference. I don't believe that statistically would hold true correlatively, but I think it's certainly, true that it does cost active employees more in their premium renewals than it would if they were not, right? So just a point to make. I don't think this is a deal breaker by any means, but something to consider. Okay, so getting into the staff survey. So this is kind of the exiting the part of the details of the plan that you heard last time. This is more of now getting into what are staff saying. And so I broke this up into pre and post. So this is pretty quick to go through, but I wanted to, when we got to having the February 13th PD day and staff that attended the focus groups, the PD day, and when we met with the Executive Association leadership, they all had the opportunity to take the survey too. The pre-survey was only available on the 13th for all staff to take at that time. So my thinking was, I want to know what people know about this before they hear 65 slide survey. Because by the time you leave, if you listen, you probably know a lot, right? And if you don't listen, you probably know more than you did before you came. So what do they know, right? So I asked 3 questions. Number 1, I understand the benefits I will receive when I retire from the West Milwaukee School District. Overwhelmingly, staff in the room across all employee groups, 75% said no, they do not know. I even included, I think so. Like, how many think you kind of know, right? 20% thought they kind of know, and 5% said they knew. They knew, like certainly knew, right? So this tells me something, right? That educating staff and having time for staff to hear this information more than once a year in an optional session is probably something that we need to take feedback on to have this be available and to make this more of well-known data, because it's a really good benefit, and I think people should have the right to know about it. I think it informs decisions. So question 2, I understand the benefits I receive when I retire from the Wisconsin retirement system, right? A different question, but yet again, 2 reasons I asked this. 1, separating. This is separate. We're talking about 2 different things, okay? And I want to know, do people know what they get when they retire? Because 20% of across the nation are leaving the educational field. Well, the Wisconsin retirement system is a great pension system. So there's more to the story here beyond West Allis, but in education, that there's benefits for fiscal reasons to stay in education, right? So want to ask that because I think there's more we can do there too. So last question was, I know how much is taken out of my paycheck for insurance every month. Like, why would he ask that? Because our health insurance is a benefit, and the best benefits are the ones you use. Well, the data here shows me that staff that use our insurance know what gets taken out. So to me, if we engage more around what our benefits are in terms of retirement, staff should start to use that as a piece of data to make decisions around, like, is this a place that I'm going to continue to work for? Is it worth it, right? From a financial lens, right? Because a lot, if you include I think so and yes, that 72% of people either know what they pay or think they know what they pay, versus the opposite being true here. So there's a definite gap, right? Of people that use our benefits know what they're using and how much it costs them, and the ones they don't use, which is retirement benefits, they don't know. So certainly a piece of feedback that me and my team learned here, which is good stuff to take into the future. Okay, so then post survey, we asked a little more questions because this is more plan specific, right? So number one, based on today's presentation, do you feel you have a good understanding of why we are looking to restructure this benefit? So about 300 people took the survey. We offer it to everybody. Certainly can't make people take it, but 300 people is a good sample size. 86% of the people that took this said they do understand why we're looking to do it. I asked every question as besides vesting as yes, no, and indifferent, because some people that came to the session, right, they may leave the session saying this proposal is no better or worse for me. It's great I can retire at 57, but I need to work to 62 because I need the insurance. Well, then you came and you left no better, because your current proposal says 62. So if that's how long you have to work, I would argue maybe you are a little better because you have the option every year. But that's why I included indifferent. I didn't want someone who doesn't care to write no, right? That's not accurate. So that's kind of the structure here. Question 2, overall, would you support the proposal? 70%, just over 70 said yes. 24%. Just our 25 said indifferent, and then the remaining group said no. Do you support lowering the retirement age 62 to 57? So a bit of a softball, but want to ask people what they think, right? So overwhelming majority said yes here. Currently, the proposal does not change sick leave payout, meaning that we offer sick leave at retirement if you meet the 20-year and the age requirement. And a large majority, again, said they support no change, meaning that they prefer the benefit that's in place and they prefer it in the proposal, which we have. Vesting's a little harder to read, so I'll talk about this a little bit more in depth here. But we asked the question here for staff to priority rank 4 different options for vesting. And we came up with these options based on what other districts offer. And so we just put them all together and said, what do you think? So for me to try to explain this best. So blue is number 1, their most preferred. Red, number 2, their second most preferred, et cetera, et cetera. Green being the least preferred, right? So you can see at the far right, 100% vested only at retirement, meaning that you only get anything if you stay until you retire. The most people thought that was the least preferred option, okay? So really how I looked at this was, which option has the most green or the most blue and red? Well, that's option 1 and option 3. So option 1 has the most because it's the most blue and the most red, right? Which has vesting as early as 5 years. The first one is 5 years, 20%, 10 years, 40. It increases by 20% each 5 years. And then in option 3, it's 25% at 5 years, 10 years, it's 50%. There's no benefit at 15 years, that's additional. And then at 20 years, 75, and then 100% retirement. So just trying to get some data that what do staff think about this, right? This is an example of something that's very specific to specific school districts trying to solve a specific answer, right? So it's different. So there's not really a best practice recommendation I can make. So the best thing I can do is what are our people saying? And then we can have a discussion about that. So question 6, instead of offering any retirement benefits, staff could receive a 3% salary increase. Is that something you'd support? Essentially meaning that there'd be no benefits for staff at retirement. So overwhelmingly, staff thought that was not something they'd support. So that's kind of that data. And then, as I mentioned before, I wanted to ask this question because I think, like I mentioned before, with the pre-survey, I think there's an opportunity here for us to provide more operation-related information to staff during the workday. We did this with health insurance transition. It was very well received. It was optional at that time before PD with breakfast. Maybe breakfast was the thing, who knows? But people came, 300 people showed up for that. So that's really great. And we want people to engage in their benefits because when they do, it provides them with a more clear picture of like, how are we offering all financial components as compared to other districts? Because it's more than just salary, right? So overwhelmingly, staff thought, yes, we would love more information during the workday. And so that is a takeaway that I will take back to my team to craft a schedule and to work with leadership and learning and Dr. Robinson to make that happen in future years. So I think that's, if anything we learn, I think this is a great takeaway for me. So, okay, revised retirement language. So getting back to the goals, like how did we develop this plan? So the goal statement, I think with any good system, you have to have a goal and then you have to have priorities that drive you in that direction, because when there are competing interests, you go back to the priorities and any decision was made around a priority. So goal statement, shift as many active employees from our current plan design to a defined contribution HRA while providing staff with a high quality, meaningful benefit. So regional comparable, all those things. Priority one, offer a rich and comparable benefit to our current retirement package. So everything you've heard from the first workshop to today is based off of our current retirement package. So all the numbers, the data, the defined contributions, it's all based on that. Decrease future opioid liability by committing dollars during active employment, lowering the retirement age to align with area school districts. The next one's about honoring staff within 5 years of retirement. Essentially, we don't want to change their plan. We feel like you're knocking on the door and you've probably made plans with family and your financial advisor. And so I don't think that's the right thing to do. And that's consistent with other districts when they have made these changes, right? We talked about the loss ratio, reducing loss ratio, aligning with our district goals of fiscal stability, and then really providing all staff with a high quality post-employment benefit that in future years recommits the savings to staff compensation, because it's an issue. And I think balancing that out is a priority of administration and the board. So, okay. So what I did for each employee group, I broke it into a table to be as readable as possible. So you could see kind of the different groups, because as I mentioned before, we simply don't have the dollars saved to shift every employee in the whole district from our current plan to an HRA, defined contribution. To do that would be, in the $15-20 million range. And it would be very costly. So other districts who have done this have either, I believe, Marty, you could speak to this, go on to referendum, do something like this. I believe that's what Shorewood did during Marty's time there. Or use a phased approach, which is exactly what this is, right? A phased approach and trying to move the needle. And then in subsequent years, new staff enter in this new proposal, right? So it's kind of this phased out approach. So the reason I spend so much time on this slide is because they all look very similar in subsequent slides. So what you'll find are there's either going to be 1, 2, or 3 groups, depending on the employee group. And so you can see group 3 here for teachers. This is kind of the grandfather group, right? Groups that is 57 in age by the end of the year and is in their 15th or more year, right? Meaning that they're within the 62 and 20. They're 5 years away or they're already at that, right? We're proposing no change to their health insurance because they're grandfathered in, no change to their sick leave. Their current retirement age is at 62 and the number of employees. So you guys get a sense of like how many people this affects. It's 30 people, right? Okay. I'm going to jump to group 1 here. So group 1 is staff that are really it's less than 6 years. They're in their 5th year or less. So 5.5 would be in here, but not 6, right? They'd be moving to an annual contribution of $2,000 per annual year. And then any year, like if they're in their 5th year, well, they would have been paid $2,000 their first year, their second year, their third year, but they also would have gained interest in those years. So when other districts regionally had done this, they've honored a 5% interest rate to do that. So that's what we have suggested here this evening. So you can see for this group of people, group 1, they would have received no change in sick leave. And then turn forward to 57. And then you can see about 276 total staff, about half, as I mentioned before, half our staff are under 5 years. That's about half, right? It's kind of the data fleshes itself out. And then everyone in the middle, right, to try to move forward to bring that group in as well. So teachers with 6 years of service, but under the 57 and 15, they're not quite old enough in that grade, right? They currently receive 5 years of health insurance monetized at the time of retirement, which is currently valued at $77,000 today, right? What we're suggesting is when that group is eligible to retire, they would receive the monetized amount of what that health insurance would be. So this group actually gets the power of time value of money, right? So we know through our renewals every year, health insurance goes up 6, 7, 8% a year. So this group, if someone were to retire in 10 years, they essentially get the increase that we get. So in 10 years, 77,000 might be 96. That's what they would get in a monetized amount, right? Like, how does that help us? Well, that actually helps us in future years lower the loss ratio for active staff. It's removing staff off our insurance, right? So that's kind of the explanation for group 2. This group also receives no change in sick leave, and then also receives a reduction from 62 to 57 to be able to retire earlier. So just about the same number of staff are in group 2 as in group 1. And then at the bottom of this slide, which is in your packet, is kind of the retirement language that's been updated. Administrative proposal, so same kind of structure, right? Group 1, 2, and 3. And you can see the proposal is essentially the same, and the number of employees, the majority of employees here are being moved to the HRA. That's the goal of the plan, move as many people as possible. That's that. So I'm going to try to move through these a little quicker just because I think they're easy to understand now that you can see the structure. At will, similar structure here. So the majority of at wills here will be moved to the HRA as well, 47 versus 5 people in group 2 and 5 people in group 3. Maintenance and cleaner, EA and secretary. I just want to highlight these by saying this is that when we started looking at these open proposals, I mentioned this before, is maintenance cleaners, EAs, and secretaries all had the ability to receive 2 years of health insurance at the time of retirement should they meet age 65 in 20 years, with the caveat that the insurance could only be paid to them if they weren't Medicare eligible, right? But the requirement at the time of 2011, the district said was that you had to be 65. Well, that conflicts because if you get 2 years of health insurance until you're Medicare eligible, but you can only retire when you are Medicare eligible, you actually get no insurance. You actually receive no benefit. So that is why this is these 3 slides are the only slides where the benefit currently does not match the proposal, because the current benefit is not something that any one of us would support. Having staff that are maintenance cleaners, secretaries, and EAs receive no benefit at retirement, I don't believe is in the best interest or meet the priorities of our goals, which is to provide high quality, comparable benefits to staff to retain them. That does not check any of those boxes. So what are we doing about that? The proposal is that all staff in these buckets be moved to a defined contribution HRA at $500 a year, which is consistent with area districts for support staff. They would be back paid for the number of years they've served in the district at a 5% rate. And you can see the number of employees here. We're also suggesting that we lower the retirement age to be consistent with all staff. There's no reason, in my opinion, that someone who is in a different employee group other than teacher, at will, and administrator be required to work longer than anyone else. To me, we're all employees, we should all have the same retirement age, and that to me is consistent with other area districts who've been moving to that. So you can kind of see the number of employees here that would be receiving a benefit, and to me, it's something to celebrate if the board approves this. So, okay, financial analysis, getting here to the end here. So I kind of broke this out.
That is halfway, Mr. Norris.
Well, we're moving through then. Sorry. So teachers, you can see the benefit here. So 276 employees we moved to the HRA, and that cost with interest is just under $1.5 million. And then an annual contribution, which is really the $2,000 multiplied by 276 for $500,000 a year, roughly. Administrators, 28 employees, $640,000. I guess catch-up contribution. At Wills, similar proposal here, 47 employees, $613,000 no interest, $750 with interest. Cleaners, you can see an annual benefit of $4,500, so nominal amount of money, but really beneficial to that employee group. This is what I want to highlight here. So 44 employees, no interest 219, with interest 419. That tells me our EA group has 44 people who have dedicated a ton of time to this district. Because the only way that that's possible for that number to be double is because the time value of money, right? So interest multiplies. And so that's a group of people who are more than thrilled that the board is hearing this proposal this evening because they've been here a long time. So, and then maintenance, similar proposal as I mentioned before, and secretaries as well. So in total, the cost to do something like this with interest is just under 4 million. That number, that's as high as it would be. You know, we have to vet these out by each employee. We have to dive into every employee to go, you're a third-year principal. You were a teacher for 8 years. You worked for the rec for 5. We have to go back and attribute the amount by the employee group they were by each year. There's 1,000 employees, right? So this number today is I don't want to use the word surface level, but it's a very conservative number based on current employees in their current positions, right? So I expect this to drop a few $100,000 by the end of the year, by the time the analysis is done. But that's a substantial amount of work, and we are up to the task, but it will take time to do. And then you have to factor in end of the year retirements, resignations. So there's moving pieces here, but that's the total catch-up contribution to do this. And then an annual amount of $776,000 before the vesting, because people leave early and then those things change. So I kind of broke this out. This kind of shows you again the same kind of thing, but I want to mention here at the note, the reason I brought this up, the note here is that in June 30th of 23, the board committed additional dollars for this proposal, which sum total $7 million in committed fund balance. You might ask the question, well, if it's $7 million, why aren't we moving enough people to have $7 million? Well, the reason that working with Baird, we recommended not doing that is because we're lowering the retirement age for all employees. So we might see an uptick of staff that decide to retire in the next year or two, which would be inconsistent with the Millman study, right? This proposal changes that plan. So we have to have dollars set aside that are not in the budget to be able to honor that unfunded benefit. And so, and we could be wrong, but it's better to be wrong and have the dollars to make good on the promise than to not be and then have to carve dollars out of the current budget or fund balance to do that additionally. So that's kind of some of the thinking behind the proposal. And then the sample, we won't go through these, they're in your packet around what that would be, but you can see that each proposal is linked with the sample vesting. Just want to highlight here, a sample investment of an HRA at $2,000, current benefit $77,000. You can see $2,000 over 30 years, assuming a 5% rate, provides a $132,000 benefit. The reason I mentioned that is you might think, well, why are we offering a $132,000 benefit if the current benefit's $77,000? Well, $77,000 in 30 years is going to be very close to $132,000. I believe it's $128,000. So providing a comparable benefit that maps out in the future, that's defined, that we can plan for, makes very, very good fiscal sense. So same thing for $500 too. So cash flow, I'll start with the trust. So to give you a little bit of background about a Fund 73 trust, a Fund 73 trust is considered an irrevocable employee benefit trust designed for other post-employment benefits. And the reason I bring this up is because, you know, a trust really provides to me transparency to staff. It's the dollars are in the trust. It's a legal document. They cannot be taken. So a future board, a future administration cannot go back and take that. They can change the current plan, but the dollars committed to those employees is theirs. And there's some knowns and some transparency to those staff knowing that these are theirs, right? And so to be honest, that's how the WRS system works. And that system people have tried taking those dollars and have been unable to do that because it's a legal trust and you cannot take it. And so it's for those reasons specifically. So there's also some really good shared costs similar to our other discussion with the defeasance. Committing dollars into a Fund 73 is instantly shared cost eligible, hence helping us with aid. So depositing $4 million into a trust will have substantial increases for the amount of aid we receive next year, which is also beneficial given the recreation project we've been working on, right? So there are other benefits beyond doing it, but another benefit there. Cash flow analysis, won't go too deep on this, but you can see in red at the very left to start this is 3.8 million, which is there in fund balance that's committed. And then this year, at this point, our projections is about 2.3 million in current year retiree benefits. So you're like, well, how are you going to sustain this? Well, we currently budget 3.5 million. So you can see here in 24, if you add 2.8 and 800,000, it's about 3.5 million. That's where having the flexibility of the other $3 million in case we see a surge of retirements or we see, should we not be able to address the retention issue and we see a number of staff that resign or retire and we have to hire a bunch of people, with 800,000 could increase substantially. We assumed a 15% increase every year. If that's 30, 800,000 could easily become 850, 860. So having some dollars set aside to mitigate that wave until we get some, 3 or 4 years of hard data to support what we think will happen is really, I think, helpful. Recommendations, we've gone through these, recommendation 1 to kind of move through this quickly is moving these individuals to the defined HRA contribution at these amounts that we went through. Recommendation 2 is allowing staff who are grandfathered to remain in their current plan. And I will stop and make a note here that if someone is grandfathered and their retirement age is 62, but now all staff can retire 57, that to me is not reasonable. Why would I have to keep working 5 more years than my counterpart? So we do have the option for staff who are grandfathered to opt out of their current plan, which is 62 with health insurance, to the group 2, which means they could retire at 57 and receive the monetized amount of their insurance. The reason we do that is because this should be up to the employee. The employee should get to decide what they want to do. If they say, you know what, the 5 years of work to get that insurance to me is not worth it, I would like to take the money and leave early, that should be up to them. They shouldn't be pigeonholed into that. So to me, that's a very reasonable accommodation. It was asked by employees. It was included in the first presentation, further confirmed. I think it's a great opportunity. Also, staff who received the early retirement option from the board last February, this does not include them. That is a separate entity. They have until June of 24 to formally retire. If they do not, then they would be subject to the changes that are here in the presentation. So option 3 or recommendation 3 is the group 2 staff receiving the monetized amount. And then recommendation 4 is allowing staff to retire at 57. All right, last piece is here. So discussion items. So based on the feedback from staff, if you were to force my hand, this is what I'd recommend, which is consistent with what the most responses we got from staff around what a vesting schedule might look like for this. But with that said, these are some potential vesting options that, at this point I would maybe pause and engage with the board around what they might think is reasonable, because it is, like I mentioned before, there is not a best practice around this. It is really up to the school district and its own entity to review their current state to make a decision around what they think is best. And so this is kind of, I think at this time I'd take a pause. Maybe if there's a discussion to be had, if not, I could continue, we can come back. So. Comments.
I'm comfortable with his recommendation.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm looking at these, I would be comfortable with option 1. I think it provides an opportunity for our teachers who are, that 5-year mark. I like that more 5-year mark. And I like the vesting schedules.
I think option 3 is too enticing for the 5-year.
Well, also in option 3, I feel like if you're here 15 years, you're still vested at 50. I mean, what's the incentive to stay another 5 years, 5 years, if at 10 years, the same amount?
That's a good point. Good point. Aaron.
Yeah.
Other thoughts? Mr. Burns, do you have a thought?
I have lots of thoughts. I like option 5. That's what I like. And I say that because I my 8th year of classroom have been in 4 different schools. And so the piece of whether or not we're valuing our staff. I think if we do have a lucrative retirement piece, that lucrative piece should be available to those intro people. And I say that with the knowledge that out of our staff, we currently have, 276 teachers under 5 years?
Yes, sir.
Which by statistics, we should lose somewhere between 40 and 50% of them. And so we're down 110 teachers. That's $220,000 that stays on the table because they have life choices that need to be made. They have things that happen. They have care for young kids or whatever else, and they lose that money if we walk away from this. And so I think that if this is truly a benefit that we're going to give them, then we should give the benefit rather than kind of like a carrot of like, keep going. If you have it there right away, it's like, no, keep working for us. We're going to keep paying you. We're going to keep supporting you. And then that money is to our staff. It's to the people that are doing the work. I think too, one of the other things that is a little bit disconcerting for me here is the 10-year, if we go option 1 at 40%. So at 10 years, you'd have 20,000, you leave and you'd get 8,000 of that, right? That's 40%. But we're also talking that if you come in for your last 7 years of service and you decide that you want to come in and then you retire from us at 7 years, you'd actually walk away with 14,000 over someone who's put in 3 years longer. And so I don't care for that because that's also saying that our employees that we're wanting to keep and say we celebrate you, well, if you wait to come see us, you'll make more money from us than if you actually come here and stay for us and work for us. And so I think there's a few things with this that I don't care for. And so I would say that option 5, where we give the people the money because that's what it is. And I think that this is also a matter of equity, in that if we're looking at what equity means, where equity means each individual or group of people is given the same resources or opportunities. Equity recognizes that each person has different circumstances and allocates the exact resources and opportunities needed to reach an equal outcome. And if we're talking about teachers that are close to retirement for 20 years here, and an equity piece of looking at this is that since 2000, the median home prices have increased by 160%. The universities have increased by 134% for tuition. And so if we're talking about that growth over time and that equity component, the money that we would have necessarily doing a vesting schedule 20 years ago might make more sense. Whereas now I don't think it makes more sense because there are more costs that our families are having to juggle because of where they're at. And I also don't think that equity with having someone come in and retire at 7 years and get full benefits and someone that works 10 years to not get that seems inappropriate to me.
Okay. Any thoughts about any of that or additional thoughts?
Aaron, Mr. Norris, when it says no vesting at time of resignation, retirement, every HRA dollar is accessible by the employee, what would that amount be?
It would be whatever's in their HRA. So if they
Okay.
left at 10 years, it would be whatever they have in their account would be accessible to them. They would take it with them essentially. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know if any district has a policy like that?
Currently, I don't know of anyone that has something like that. I did ask Ken as an extension of our committee meeting to look into, and at this point, he said he had from the districts he'd worked with, there hasn't been one. That's essentially why that wasn't an option with the survey, as I mentioned to Mr. Burns. Yeah.
My issue with number 5 is that I want something that's going to retain staff, and having something that if, as you continue on, the district grows, to me, it's more of a benefit to retain staff. If someone come and then leave, we just pay money, extra money outside of their salary. I don't know how that's helping the district retain staff and having consistent people working with our students year after year. it's very obvious that the current policy that we have right now, our retirement plan, either from lack of understanding of what the retirement plan actually provides, because it's very evident that most staff didn't really have a clue about what they were getting unless they had, my guess, had been here for a longer amount of time. Although we don't have that data from the survey results, but 75% of people say, no, I don't know what I'm going to get if I retire here. That is something that, you know, if that was properly communicated, would that change decision-making? Would people have stayed here? I don't know. I mean, that's a question we can't know the answer to. But having something where you change it to a policy, right? That is hopefully going to be also a financial benefit to the district, so it can continue on long-term. But now you don't have something you can plan for, right? Because you have money going in, money going out, depending on if someone leaves or not. Versus like, oh, this person's going to get to 5 years, so we know that 20% or whatever it ends up being is going to be what's going to be coming out of that HRA pot. So that's my concern. I want to find, what I want is something that as a retirement benefit will actually get people to come here and stay here. And if I look at number 5, I don't know why they would want to stay here. Come here for a few years, just get some money and off you go. Like, and then come back 3 years later and get some more money and off you go. So I want people to come at year 1 and stay to year 30.
Some of the thinking around at retirement, to speak to your question, Mr. Burns, is, you know, everyone's life is just different. You know, I know people that quit jobs and started teaching at 46, and they came and gave the district 10 good years of work, and they decided to retire. And I think other districts think that's different. I think that's what they think. If you come here, second career, you shift, you moved, and you gave us 7, 5, 6, 7 good years, you should get every dollar. You're retiring. You're not taking a job at it. I don't know. I guess I'm trying to make assumptions. I guess I'm not positive, but that seems to be a bit of where the thinking shifts, because everyone's doing that. So, other thoughts?
These are post employee benefits. And so we're looking at retirement. And so I think that vesting is very appropriate. It says, we are going to consider you. We are going to give you something if you leave, because this is really for the long term. These are post employment benefits. So we have to think in those terms. And so I am very much for vesting.
And this, just to be very clear, this is just for HRA. Like, if you aren't here for 20 years, you don't get sick leave. Like, there's some things that honor those people that spent their 20, 30 years here beyond this, right? So that's something else to just make a note for everyone listening. This is just for HRA, right? So that's specifically, so. Not to cut you off, Ms. Carr, sorry.
Right. I agree largely with Noah here. I think if we're going to do something, I think something like option 1 makes sense. I think we need to do something to encourage retention. To me, that just makes the most sense. And I kind of worry about, you know, if we have a situation where somebody works here 2, 3 years and then they get everything, that's, I don't know, I just feel as though that's not necessarily fair either to the teachers that have been here for 15 years and they put in that time, and now there's somebody new who was here 3 years and they're getting everything paid out. So I think we have to look at it long term here, and you know, benefits are an important part of what makes employers attractive one way or the other. And I just think doing some type of investment in different intervals will hopefully encourage individuals to stay a little bit longer. And I don't discount the fact that there are sometimes life situations that dictate the need to make a move. But I think in terms of limit or minimizing those choices just between districts, I think this would help in that regard.
And I think too, because our district, a lot of people look at as a starting point.
Mhm.
A lot of times it seems like they come in the preconceived notion of coming in for a short term seems to be kind of the feel. So I already sometimes feel like they're already only kind of thinking to come for a short amount of time anyway. So I kind of feel like that option one is a good middle ground between the two. You know, like I totally understand what you're saying and, you know, and Noah too. So I'm torn between them. So I'm kind of looking for that, you know, that at that halfway point. And so that's where I look at option one and go, okay, well, then that way it's kind of the best of both. So you get those people that are just looking at a place to start to at least go, okay, well, hopefully you can at least get them for the 5 with the hope that they'll stay longer, you know, but at least they're not going to only be here for 3 and jump ship and then take whatever they've got at that point with. You know, so to me, I think that's a good middle ground.
Mr. Sickich.
Are the recommendations that are printed here yours or are they from the committee?
You mean these recommendations, Mr. Sickich,
Yes.
right here? These recommendations would come from, I guess, a conjunction of both, but this is really from our teams. to-
From the information you
Yes.
received from the team, this is
Yeah.
what,
Yeah.
then I'd be with whatever number one was.
Yeah.
Because I didn't work on a committee, didn't hear all the questions or discussions. But if you guys did and came up with this as your best number one, who might argue?
And I do want to just make a quick point, like this vesting schedule, this can be and should be reviewed either every 4 or 5 year, whatever that may be, because we might find that 20% isn't moving the mark. And then to Brendan's point, well, how much money are we seeing in defaults from that? What are we doing with that question of what do you do with it is the question that we should have. We should have that discussion, like repurpose that into compensation. Maybe that's the marker that keeps people, or maybe 20% in 5 years goes to 30. Like, we're trying to move the needle on the graph, right? That's the goal. I think we would all agree that's a problem. And so I think whatever we start with might not be what we end up with, and that's okay, you know? So I think that's continuous improvement.
You know, I would agree with that. That's a point I was gonna make, is that the starting point isn't an ending point. And if, you know, from day one, I've said, I want something that will attract and retain staff by actual numbers.
Right.
Seeing our retention rate increase over time.
Right.
Once we make a change to a compensation model or to our OPEB benefits or to our insurance. If we actually see an actual trend in the right direction, then okay. But if we don't, well, then there's no point in continuing on with something that's not working.
Right.
And I mean, obviously, that's continually requiring the board and administration to continue working and getting feedback from staff and so forth and so on. But I think at the end of the day, we're trying. And we're trying to be responsible and not promise the moon and not be able to, you know, 5 years down the road, be able to actually deliver it.
Right.
And being realistic about the financial situation that, you know, all districts really are in, but specifically our district is in. Not that we're in dire straits, but we don't want to get there by having a benefit that we can't long-term support. So I agree 100% that, you know, going with something now should be evaluated as it gets implemented and move forward. And then if it's not showing the returns we want, then query the staff and say, at that point, hey, we moved this here, you know, what, is this what you wanted? Do you want something different? What would it be? Can we afford that? And then move forward from there. Mr. Becker.
To that end, on teacher retention, I know we talk a lot about, we have a lot of 0 to 5s, but we don't have the 10 to 15s. So I wonder if there's any rationality to going with option one, but instead of 40% at year 10, maybe we make that up, bump it up to 50%, 20, 50, and then 60, 80 as it is, but really focus on that group we're trying to bring in. And in a similar sense, to kind of hedge, kind of blur the lines, like Mr. Burns was saying. I wonder if there's any flexibility with providing something for the 0 to 5 years, people who don't make the 5. Maybe it's not 100%, but maybe it's a portion they were here that did something. I don't know. Maybe a bit wishy-washy, but I want my cake and eat it too.
So that's another question though, is like, what's that benefit? How does that help the district, right? So if we're just essentially giving the money.
Oh, yeah.
What is that
I'm-
gonna do? What that could provide, say, okay, is that gonna increase the number of teachers we're gonna have, will that increase turnover? You know, but that's the thing, I don't know the answer, but that's a question that I would ask. Sorry, Amy wants some person, Mr. Burns.
I'd also like to just point out that I'm 100% support our teachers and all of our staff, but this is also a relationship. As an employer, like, you know, we have to provide something to them, and, you know, similarly, we provide things for them. Like, I know in my job, they pay for me to get certain licensures and stuff like that. And I know we do provide stuff like that, or like tuition. So to me, I feel like asking them to vest or give, you know, get 20% at 5 years, I will not support that if you're at 5 years or less getting money. I think this is an incentive. This is a reason, like, to get, we want to keep people here. I just see that as giving out money. I mean, I think there is also a responsibility too, to, like, you know, if we're going to invest this money, then, you know, there's a little expectation for something back. And I understand life circumstances. I've been in places where I've lost my job unexpectedly. I get that, but I just feel like, you know, we have to be financially responsible too. And we know that we don't know what more funding we're going to get. And so I just think it just seems like that would be giving out free money. I would not support that.
The other piece on the 5 years is, not that this matters, but from a consistency perspective, the WRS requires a 5-year vesting for any match. So when you pay in the WRS for year 1, 2, 3, 4, if you leave education, you don't get any match. Just an FYI. I only bring that up because I did a lot of compare to contrast there. So maybe it's a moot point, just something to consider.
Mr. Burns.
I was just gonna say that I would like us to be a little careful with saying that we're just giving money away. I don't think that anyone really believes that our teachers are paid enough for what they do. And so just saying that we're just giving money away, they're putting in a lot of time and work. And even if it's year 1, 2, 3, or 5, they're putting in a lot of work. And so I think we need to also be very careful about how we're doing it. Do we want to retain them? Yes. Do we want to attract them? Yes. But none of this is just giving money away. What they do is huge. And I'm back in the classroom. I'm not sure I want to be, but that's where I am. And it is a huge price that we put on our teachers with the expectations that we place there. So I think that we need to be very careful about the wording that we're using when we're talking about the financial pieces that come for them. We're not just giving money away.
I don't think
We're
anyone's
paying them
making
for their
that.
service. I know, but I think it sounds like we're being kind of willy-nilly of like, oh, you're just here for 5 years. We don't want to just waste that on you. It's not a waste.
But we're also making a lot of strategic decisions to close buildings, to do things so that we can increase their salaries too. So it's not like this is one piece of the picture, you know, this is one part of it. We also are putting other things in motion so we can maybe compensate our teachers by paying them more. So then, you know, so what I'm saying, what I'm trying to say is that I understand what you're saying about the language, but I don't think anyone on this board, you know, doesn't realize how hard all of our staff work.
And I understand that. I'm just saying that because of the scrutiny that we've been under and with everything that's going there, I think that we should just be careful on how we're wording that for us, because our staff are valued in that. Even if they're here for a short time, they're valued.
Yep, and that's why we want to increase their salary, which is used to pay them while they're here and they're valued. These are other
No,
postal.
Sounds like Midwestern.
This
Yes,
is
I've never
other
heard.
postal point benefits. Right now, a staff member who leaves after 5 years gets no,
Yeah.
right? You get nothing.
Yeah.
That's correct. That's correct. So if you say for 5 years under this plan, you get 20% of something.
Yep.
If we went with option 1.
Marginally better.
I very rarely try to compare education to other industries. However, in terms of vesting, that is pretty standard across the board. Usually you will have like a 5% or 5% 5-year vesting period in almost every other industry that I've been exposed to. So again, I hate comparing the two because they're different things, but in that regard, it's pretty standard.
One other thing I want to mention with Mr. Becker's comment, not having a lot of teachers in the 10 to 15 range. That 10 to 15 was about when Act 10 went into place. And so I think that's when you start seeing more mobility and teachers could make a decision about, well, I'm this far into the process of what used to be, right? And what, depending on what changes the district made, make a decision if you want to jump ship somewhere else or not. Versus at Act 10, when you were new to teaching, then there was the Wild West, which is what we have right now. So I think that might play a role into why we see lower numbers of staff. That, I mean, you'd have to look at all districts to really know, or query the staff who are there for that long to know for certain. But I think that might play a role because Act 10 really changed the landscape of how all of this came about. So not that I'm opposed necessarily to trying to give a larger carrot at that particular point, but I think that might be one reason why we see that dip. And as a government employee myself, I have to wait 5 years before I get benefit in WRS as well. And in fact, I didn't get health insurance for the first 2 months paid for. I had to do that myself. So that's something that our staff don't have to, they can get health insurance paid right away. They don't have to wait. As a state employee, I did. So I think that's another, teaching staff are a little bit better off than other governmental employees, at least in that regard. So I guess we have other comments on this, or we're looking for some direction about where we want to move from here, because we have an action item that would be happening here at the end of the month about moving forward with a plan, opening up the 173. Oh, I think one thing that'd be important to talk about is the district in the past had an issue with OPEB fuss. And I know we brought this up before, but now we're at this point. How is this different than that if we would approve this?
So the OPEB proposal that we're hearing today, right, and dedicating dollars into what's called an OPEB trust is really for the purposes of having a defined contribution, not an investment, right? And so part of the trust agreement that the board will see at the end of the month is that those dollars go into what's called a fixed interest account. So same amount of risk that you have as having money in a savings account or a CD or things like that. So versus having dollars tied into real estate and, other investments that might be more risky. That's the major and main difference to this. So the trust will act as more as I mentioned before, as a transparent entity that protects people and allows the district to have benefit to share cost eligibility and to, in years of surplus, not have to have the aid hit take. I mean, things like that. It serves as a benefit to both, I believe, our staff and our district. So great question, and I apologize for not bringing that up.
What would the rate, we wouldn't know what the rate is until we put it in?
Well, at this point, it's ranged, but a minimum interest rate, I think, of 1.3%. But then in better markets like today, I believe right now it's 2.5. So, so I have to check with Ken on that. Yeah.
Anything else? So I've heard option 1. I've heard option 5. Again, we're not making any decisions officially right now, but I guess in general, we need to tell Aaron, like, are we okay with the plan in front of us and the recommendations that were provided? Mostly nodding. Records all right. Mr. Burns.
From where I'm at.
Where is that?
All right. Well, thank you. All right.
Yeah,
So-
then we'll move forward.
Yeah.
Appreciate all the work, Aaron, that you and
Yes,
the team
thank
put in.
Yeah,
Make
thanks,
this work
Aaron.
for the
Yeah, thank you.
board. You're really good questions.
Yeah, well, thanks for your time and very much appreciate it. So this is kind of the next steps we have is I'll work with my team to prepare these items for action in the 27th, and then the schedule that I presented before will take place. And yeah, it's a long process and appreciate you guys taking the time and engaging with it. And go ahead, sorry, Mr. Chicken.
Before we, before we take action on this at the end of the month, will you be meeting with the teachers group or whatever team you had, just to kind of say how this went?
I didn't have intention to. I certainly can.
I'm just asking.
No, it's a good question. No, I hadn't planned to, given that the plan hadn't fundamentally changed. The only one change I did want to mention quick is that this came up as a proposal that I believe it was the association had asked about having staff have access to the clinic. And I think I mentioned this to my fiscal committee. And so currently staff who retire that are on our insurance can use the clinic. So given that we're transitioning away from staff having insurance when they retire, the question was, can staff use it until they hit Medicare eligibility if they retire with us? Given that it's going to be a shift, like kind of a wash of cost per the analysis I did, I think it's a reasonable option, and we are at a time where we're looking to get more people to use it. I think it's an easy option to offer staff. So, but yeah,
So would that be part of the action or is that a separate action?
it's more of a practice. It's
Oh,
not
just
like
a
a,
practice.
yeah, it's not like, it's just a practice we have with staff who can. Yeah.
Okay, and then if staff have anything that they don't think was covered right, I would encourage them to reach out to you so that if there's other things that we should be in consideration that we didn't hear tonight, that we can, provide that to you so that that can be also included in the action, or if there's any additional things that we need to consider.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thank you for your time tonight.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morris.
Thank you very much. All right, so that ends our workshop for this evening. Let's take a 5-minute break so we can get into closed session. We are in recess.